If someone asks you why you didn't like the second year arc as much as the first year, you could summarize your answer to these 3 points. Too many characters, way too many unexplored plots, and some seriously questionable decisions that the author chose for the development of the story. To me, the second year arc just doesn't stand on its own. It feels more like an extended setup for the third year arc rather than a fully developed story in itself. And with 15 volumes stretched across over 5 years, that was a seriously long setup that made a lot of readers drop the series. The true fans will say it definitely will pay off later, but that doesn't excuse the flaws we've seen so far. So, let's break it down and take a closer look at where exactly the second year arc falls short. The first premise of the second year arc is the White Room students who came to ANHS under Tsukishiro's order to try to expel Ayanokoji. We got introduced to 6 different new characters, and it keeps us busy trying to guess which one is the White Room student. The way Volume 1 delivered the new characters is not exactly good, because it mostly focused on Tsubasa, Hosen, and Ichiko, but it was a decent volume as the debut of the new characters. Their character got explored more in Volume 2, where each character had shown their goal and a bit of what they were capable of. However, Volume 2 is where things start to get complicated. When the first-year students prepared their own agenda, the second-year students also chose to join the battle and form a team to face the biggest special exam in the history of Classroom Elite. Not only the first and second years, but Nagumo and Kiriyama from the third year also have their own motive to achieve victory. Since Volume 2 is just a setup volume, all of their plot could be packed into a single volume. However, the execution turns out to be a problem. The Uninhabited Island exam is the only exam that requires 2 volumes to conclude it. With more than 30 named characters competing for the top spot, everything starts to become a mess with no clear direction on how or when their conflict will intersect and be resolved. Volume 3 seems to be fine since it was just the first half of the exam and an introduction for each party in the exam, but Volume 4 ended up becoming so packed that a few parties ended up receiving a very dirty conclusion. There are at least 4 different parties in this exam. The first one is Tsukishiro and the White Room students who try to expel Ayanokoji, this including the first-year student who wants to expel him for a 20 million bounty. The second one is the second-year student, which was mostly dominated by the Sakayanagi group and the Ryuin group. The third one is the third-year group who were led by Nagumo, where they moved according to his command to ensure Nagumo's position in the top spot. And the last one is the extra party, which consists of a few students who just mind their own business, just like Koenji and Kiryuin. The first problem with the Uninhabited Island exam is there are too many characters to handle, and a few of them were not even important for the story. For example, even if they did not exist, Kiryuin and Shiba wouldn't change anything in the Uninhabited Island exam. Not to mention the way a few characters got their conclusion feels really forced, as if the author ran out of ideas on how to include them in the bigger plot. The way Hosen mindlessly chases Ayanokoji just to have a fistfight against him, or Nagumo abandons his entire grade just to prove that he is superior to Ayanokoji. Their actions were undoubtedly disappointing, and then we got the climax battle between Ayanokoji and Tsukishiro. Tsukishiro was supposed to be the big villain ever since his introduction in the first-year arc, but after doing almost nothing for 7 volumes, he ended up stepping out of the stage just to add another disappointment for the readers. As if it was not enough, his last handshake with Ayanokoji just added another mystery that might already be forgotten by most of the readers. The Uninhabited Island exam was the first turning point where the Classroom Elite started to lose its momentum. Even from the sales data, we could see the readers' disappointment through how much Volume 4 was sold, but the sales just dropped in Volume 4.5. Even until now, there was no volume that could match Volume 4 in terms of sales. There were too many unresolved conflicts, and it also failed to fulfill readers' expectations for a big battle between Ayanokoji and Koenji. Volume 4.5 is not making it better, but just adding fuel to the fire. Instead of reducing the characters so the story could focus on one single conflict, Volume 4.5 teases us with a lot of potential conflict between the students of different grades. It teases us with Ryuin chasing Utomiya, or Sakayanagi challenging Ichika, and the long-awaited battle between Ayanokoji and Nagumo. However, this decision ended up leading us to the second turning point of the Classroom Elite's downfall. After Volume 4.5 teases us with the battles between grades, Volume 5 suddenly focus just on the second-year students, and it's not even a battle between classes, but focus on the internal conflict inside each class. Even though Volume 5 was such a great volume, it feels really strange because we didn't get any information about the continuation of the first-year students' conflict. Volume 5 feels like a filler, and it's actually fine if it was just a single volume. But Volume 6 keeps focused on Ayanokoji and students in his grade and leaves us clueless about what happened with the first year, especially Yagami as the White Room student. The first-year student only got a minor role in Volume 6, but my biggest problem with Volume 6 is the sudden involvement of Ishigami Kyo. Instead of utilizing the already existing first year, Kinugasa decides to introduce a completely new first-year student, which means adding more characters to the already too large cast in the story. Kinugasa should be able to merge the Utomi and Ishigami characters into one single character, but they ended up becoming two separate characters with very little involvement in the story. Move to Volume 7, we reach the second turning point where everything starts to go nowhere, which is Yagami's expulsion. Yagami was teased to be the second year's biggest antagonist, but after doing almost nothing for the entire second year arc, he was suddenly written out of the story in a way that left us with a lot of questions. Yagami's expulsion feels really sudden because it just happens without a warning. After Volumes 5 and 6 focused on Ayanokoji and students in his grade, Volume 7 suddenly served us Yagami's expulsion without an appetizer. Ishigami's warning is the only hint that we got about it, but other than that, Yagami's expulsion really feels rushed and perhaps unnecessary. Without Yagami in the school, there is no longer any threat that could harm Ayanokoji, and without any villain, the story somehow lost its direction. After Yagami's expulsion, it should be Nagumo's turn to become the next antagonist. But the way Kinugasa writes Nagumo's story feels like Kinugasa has another plan in his mind, and there is no room for Nagumo on it. The way Nagumo's character got executed in the story is disappointing in a lot of ways. He was already introduced in the first year arc as a character with great social skills and student council power. He was written as the antithesis of Harukita Manabu, and his action in Volume 8 where he tried to expel Tachibana really set his standing as a villain. However, ever since Volume 8, his character has just gone downhill. He played a background role in the Ichino Serumer, but other than that, he didn't do anything notable. His confrontation with Ayanokoji on the island feels really forced, and his revenge arc ended with just a simple agreement. Nagumo has a lot of potential, but his presence just didn't fit into the latter half of the second year arc, where the story focused more on the class leaders. This might be controversial, but I do believe Volume 11's second year arc exists solely to conclude Nagumo's story. Even if you didn't read it, you wouldn't lose too much. You just need to know that Nagumo already accepts his bad luck and goes to college. After Yagami got expelled, the second-year plot started to shift from the first-year student to the second-year student character development. This sudden change doesn't feel right because after all the volume we spend investing in the first-year students, they suddenly become a background character without any further explanation. However, it is what it is. We start to be introduced to a lot of new characters from each class, and each of them has their own story. Their story was not the problem. The problem is, there were too many stories to include in one single plot. Ika Love Story, Tokido Rebellion, Haruka Revenge, Kanzaki Revolution, Ichinosa Breaking Bad, Maizono Suspicion, Hashimoto Betrayal, and the bet between Sakayanagi and Ryuen. Some of them managed to get a proper writing, but the rest got so little attention that it doesn't even feel like a conflict. Haruka's Revenge was over into volumes, Tokido's Rebellion is going nowhere, and Kanzaki Revolution is not even important anymore. This is just my personal opinion, but I believe their story was created just for the sake of development for the class leaders. The problems with Kushida and Haruka were created to test Horikita's responsibility. The problem with Tokido was created to polish Ryuen's leadership. The problem with Hashimoto was created to humanize Sakayanagi. And the problem with Kanzaki was created just to give a final push for Ichinose. In simple terms, they were just a sacrifice to make the class leaders look better. But the ironic thing is, the class leaders were developed just to make Ayanokoji look even better. After Yagami got expelled, no one could oppose Ayanokoji anymore, so he acted as he pleased and manipulated the others for his own goal. This condition somehow removes the tension from the story, because we all know Ayanokoji will always end up as the victor at the end. Even though it solidifies Ayanokoji's position as the strongest, it makes the story become boring and repetitive. Another problem that becomes really apparent in second year arc is Kinugasa's habit of writing a hype scene without a good delivery. It all started with Ayanokoji's intention to get a high score in Island exam, teasing us with the possibility of him facing Koenji, but they just to playing tug of war. The last illustration of Volume 3 is also a good example of hype writing, because it make us think the battle between Ayanokoji and Yagami will finally begin, but turns out it will never begin. Volume 6 once again hypes us with Ayanokoji vs Nagumo, but the biggest hype in Volume 6 was definitely Ayanokoji's last monologue, where he stated that he will leave Horikita's class. Ayanokoji vs Nagumo got hyped again in Volumes 9 and 11, but they never really get a satisfying conclusion. However, the hype of class transfer finally pays off in Volume 12.5, and it was one of the best decisions Kinugasa ever made in this series. This hype writing might be the main reason why the new volume of Classroom of the Elite is still anticipated by the readers. First we got hyped by Ayanokoji's transfer, and then we got hyped about Ichinose's dark development, and then we got hyped about Ryuen and Sakayanagi's bet. While it's not wrong to hype something, most of the hype didn't get a proper writing to satisfy the readers. Ayanokoji vs Tsukishiro, Kushida's expulsion, Haruka's withdrawal, and many others, most of them ended up in such an anticlimactic way. Volume 12.5 was the peak of hype writing, because it hyped us with a lot of potential conflict for the third year arc such as Ayanokoji vs Koenji, and Ichinose becoming Ayanokoji's friend with benefits. However, Volume 12.5 also gave us what has been hyped all along, such as Ayanokoji's transfer, and his breakup with Kei. From what I can conclude, it feels like Kinugasa had been holding all the hypest moments to put them at the latest volume of the second year arc, so the third year arc could have a fresh start along with the greatest hype possible. Even though Kinugasa needs to sacrifice a few volumes, this strategy is proven succeed with Volume 1 of the third year arc feeling like a brand new starter with a solid plot for the future. Now that the second year arc is over, let's just hope Kinugasa will not repeat the same mistake, and focus on delivering the best ending possible for the story.